All right, so let's switch to Q&A. Let's see here what we got. So great question on how do we define and measure productivity gains? So we see productivity gains increase over time as people get comfortable with using it and are better at prompting. Excellent, excellent question. So I want to talk about the ROI. I'll do that in deeper detail in the business readiness one because I think it's really important to understand these metrics. But there are, like as I mentioned, there's sort of two main pathways to measuring at a baseline level. There's the productivity benefits, which is this task took me this long before, and this task takes me this long after. And that is literally it. The measurement is that basis, and there's a lot of different ways you can assess that. And essentially we're doing is we're scaling that type of assessment model so that we can understand the productivity changes. You need to complement those productivity changes with qualitative insights, because some of those productivity changes look great, but again, as I mentioned, if you're arguing with Copilot for 70 minutes to get 7 minutes of value, those productivity measurements might be a little bit off. Keep in mind, when you give someone time back, they don't always use that time very valuably. So there's a difference, and I don't want to get into like studies and report, but like a manager generally, I'm not trying to pick on individual contributors, but a manager typically, when they get time back, maximizes that time better because they have high demands on them, like constantly people asking for stuff, versus somebody who's an individual contributor. So we actually do things, we call it conversion loss, where you get productivity and then there's a percentage of that that's lost for these types of roles or these types of areas, and it can be different per customer. So those, again, take your productivity numbers and reduce them further. So those are some quick things to think about. On the quality side, it's really about what the impact it drives. So let's say you have RFP documents you're generating with generative AI using Copilot. And of course, we know productivity has gotten better, but let's talk about the quality gain. So when you ask people through randomized trials and other techniques, when you ask them like, is this better? And they pick consistently the AI-based content, then what that tells you, and by how much, that starts to give you a sense of the quality gain. What you then do is you look at that and cross-reference it with things like your sales performance or other factors. We're using the example of proposals there. And then you add a little bit more insight and math to understand the quality impact. And that's how essentially you manage your quality. Now, both of those are what I was considering stage one, like early stage metrics for AI. There's actually a lot more we're doing with customers today beyond those. So what we're starting to assess now is collaboration impact, because what happens is when you use AI tools like this, one person works with another person, what ends up happening is because they're working together, right now you have this, what we call low value collaboration. So I interrupt you to ask you a question because I want to use a skill. You're really good at finding SharePoint documents, or you're really good at making PowerPoint presentations better. So I'm using, almost transactionally, I'm using your time. And these people, by the way, that we're using are highly leveraged, very, very valuable resources. So essentially we're interrupting them, breaking their flow and concentration, and then we're asking them for help. Whereas a lot of that can be done now with the skills and capabilities that Copilot provides. So what that means is another measure that's really important is you measure, I'm describing it as collaboration, but it's really complex. You're measuring the efficacy and change of reductions in low value collaboration activities and how those shift to AI and are more efficient, et cetera. And you're also measuring how effective high value collaboration things are becoming with AI infusement. And that means like those meetings, and you can of course do this qualitatively, but there's some really interesting data points we can get to where you can actually see, those brainstorming sessions, those, really everyone's involved and invested, those types of meetings, they are so much more pronounced and impactful when you don't need to worry about note taking, when you can use AI to quickly summarize stuff, when you can use AI to, in the flow of the meeting with everyone watching, use it to like make sense of things and re-rationalize things. So that kind of impact, we don't have, I wish there was like standard metrics. We're working on it, but that type of metric stuff is also really important to measure. And honestly, it drives more substantial ROI for organizations, at least from what we've seen so far, than baseline productivity and baseline quality gains. And the other thing is that is nothing compared to the management gains. So the last category is way too early to talk about in a proper way, but we are starting to look at things like how it affects the way we manage our work individually and the way we manage people. And look, there's a lot of management science stuff here to dig into, but those metrics are really exciting. And the way you want to think about it is, let's take a 6-month time frame. So by the way, in the business one, we'll talk about this more. 6 months is a good time frame to drive impact with Copilot for Microsoft 365. 3 months is too short. So you have 6 months, you spend like 2 months on communications, like productivity, quality gain stuff. Then you essentially spend the middle-ish 2 months around collaboration, start to make sense of that. Then the last 2 months you start to deal with this business management, and then by the end of that 6 month time frame, you have some really interesting ROI assessments and analysis. So I went way deeper than I meant to on that. Sorry, I'm just very passionate about this. We'll talk more about it in the business one, but I hope that answers your question. It's a great question around how do we measure productivity gains and how do we start thinking about things like metrics on Copilot experiences. And checking for some other questions here. Another one that came in online was around technical readiness. One of the challenges is funding, and I totally feel it. So what happens is there's, I'm paraphrasing the question. People essentially get a request for let's roll out Copilot, but the problem is, while Copilot itself has pretty good ROI and it's easy to measure, because this technical debt or security debt is feels overwhelming, even if it's maybe not, it's harder to price. It's harder to get the budget and investment from the business. And so then they basically say, well, let's just not do that. Let's just do, the free version of Copilot or something else and miss this significant ROI because they're, IT itself is saying, I don't want to take on that responsibility or change my schedules and risk. And it's not in an irresponsible way. They just literally can't figure out a budget or pathway for it. So one of the things that we've talked about before is this idea of the way organizational change can drive budget impact. So let's say you have a business unit. Let's use the concept of security processing and payment. So you want to use Google Drive, or maybe Google Drive's a bad example. Let's use something that's a little bit less secure. Let's say you want to use Dropbox or something. So you want to use Dropbox, or you want to use some other, service online. And that service is something you as a business unit decide you're going to use. So you make the decision. It's not shadow IT. You're even informing IT, but you make the purchase and you start to use that tool. Now, IT has a responsibility to make sure that that content is secure, it's discoverable, a variety of things are happening with it, right? So now IT has to carry that burden, that cost to manage that. Now, that doesn't mean there's a cost transfer. It just means that we have to track how much effort it takes for IT to manage this additional thing that is redundant based on other tools that you have in your portfolio, like OneDrive or SharePoint, et cetera, and Teams. So in that scenario, what we often describe the model that IT uses is we use this thing like based on insurance where you have a higher premium. So if you want to buy a sports car and you want to drive recklessly and you get, at least in Canada, you get demerit points, then your insurance rates go up, right? You pay more per month for insurance. Now, this is funny money. It doesn't have to be real money, but you're essentially showing that these business units that have made some of these decisions, they are carrying a much higher premium cost on the overall budget of IT. And this incentivizes in those broader executive discussions that, hey, we can keep doing this, but we are paying this one way or another, we're paying for this. And so by acknowledging that, it often puts the right type of pressures on those business units to stop doing those things that are not conducive for long-term benefit for the organization, even though it may be a personal preference or even, there might be like specific needs. And if there are specific patterns that they need, you can just cross-reference those and give an option, a pathway for IT, and then all of a sudden everything gets better. So this simple measure of premium costs, kind of like insurance that are driven, is really important because right now we have tools. There's a AI discovery tool in your cloud access planning. So in the Microsoft admin center, in the experiences, you have things like you can take firewall logs, upload them, and then see who's using Box and all these other unsanctioned file sharing tools, right? Just like that, we can actually do the same thing and see through Edge experiences and other things. We can see who's using like Bard, who's using other experiences outside in the marketplace, Assembly AI, whatever. Nothing wrong with those services. I'm just saying like they're using other AI tools. And then what we can do is we can say, okay, look at all this volume. That has cost to IT because that's security data risk. That's, it's like premium insurance. So you can just use that number, which is really easy to assess. Like what I'm describing, you can do with these automated reviews in Purview. So you get that information. And then, of course, Purview is trying to sell you on, well, you can protect those things. I can apply that to Bard. But screw that. Let's just get them off of those tools in the first place and bring them into Copilot and bring them into, more enterprise-based services. So in that model, we can essentially create that same sort of funding collection and say, look, this is the premium. And again, it can be funny money. It does not need to be real transfers of money, just something that allows you to explain at the executive level, like, this is how much money we're wasting because of our current AI strategy and posture. And if we we're a bit more heavy-handed or approach this in a more collaborative way, we can bring this cost down and we can improve the experience. And those cost differentials pay for all of these things that we're describing. So everything I'm saying you could do within a very short amount of time, because you can start to aggregate what I'm describing over the last 2 years or last 6 months. And so that's what a lot of customers will do, is they'll use the tools like Purview and others to gather that insight, and then they'll bring that to an executive discussion, a steering discussion, explain why, and now all of a sudden budget is absolutely unlocked in very real ways. Again, kind of like the metrics discussion, a little bit more detailed, but probably very helpful when we think of service model design and some of those pricing points. So I'm hoping that helps those who are working through this experience in the future. And I think those are the two main questions I see. A wonderful recording is, of course, available. Slides are available already. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time. And I look forward to seeing you in the business readiness or in future Copilot discussions in person or online. Thanks so much.